Hey everyone, I'm Danny and welcome to Wizardry Workshop. I usually do Harry Potter videos, DIY videos on this channel, but sometimes I just want to stray away from it and do something else that I love. So in this video, I'm doing something completely different. This is a Ghostbusters Proton Pack. This was supposed to be a Halloween video, but here I am wearing a Ghostbusters costume in December. I just really underestimated how much time this was going to be to put together. I made it out of cardboard, which I've never seen before. I made my own templates and everything. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I'll just make it out of cardboard. No, I thought it was going to take a week and it took me like a month or more. In fact, this video turned out being such a beast. I had hours upon hours of footage to cut down and try and fit into a YouTube video. It took so long, hundreds of gigabytes worth of space on my hard drive. So instead of the usual where I just record it and talk about it as I'm doing it, this time I decided to cut it into pieces and do a voiceover, which I normally don't do, but I thought maybe it would be less confusing for viewers if I voiced it over after the fact so that I could explain what I'm doing. I don't want to chatter on too long because this is a very long, in-depth video. There are just a couple of things we need to get together and things that I need to say before we jump into this. First, you're definitely going to need to download the schematics that I used these to actually put my templates together. So it has all the sizing and it has all the different pieces of the Proton Pack right in here. You can see what they're supposed to look like, all the different pieces that you might need. I've linked these in the description box. I got them off of gbfans.com, and this was put together by someone named Stefan Otto, so thank you so much for that. I would not have been able to get this the right size or even attempt to do this without your schematics, so that's awesome. Go ahead and follow that link. Print yourself out a copy of these and staple them together. You're going to need them throughout the whole thing. I call these parts by name. For example, there's one called the Cyclotron and the end filter, which is right here. So you'll see me working on a part that looks like this. If I say the name of a part you don't know what it is, refer to these schematics. You'll find it and you'll be able to follow along. In the templates, you're going to find all the different parts of the Proton Pack, as well as stickers that go in various different places on the pack. Again, I have to say thank you to another user on gbfans.com, that is pseudodon7. They posted some really clean versions of these stickers, and they looked great as they were, so I thought, why would I need to redesign them? I used those, scaled them to fit this full-size pack, and I also added some aging to them to make them just look gritty. I wanted this whole project to look gritty. I did not want it to look clean. I wanted it to look welded together, dirty, used. Secondly, this is only the Proton Pack, so it doesn't include the plasma gun or thrower. That's going to have its own separate video because it's a beast of its own entirely. Also, to actually wear this, you need something called an Alice frame. So this is kind of like a metal frame with some straps on it that's used for like military backpacks and stuff to attach to. That's what they used in the film. So if you want to wear this, you have to get one of those and attach this to it. Or you can wait for the next video in this Ghostbusters series where I'm going to show you how to make your own Alice frame. The last thing is, I kind of just like go through it really fast in this video. I show you what I'm doing and I say what I'm doing, but I just hope that it comes across and you're able to understand it, because I do really just quickly go through it all because I don't want a 2-hour video. If there is something that you don't understand, you can ask me in the comments, or if you're here during the premiere, you can ask me in the live chat. Or if you'd rather go to my Discord server, I made a channel just for the Ghostbusters Proton Pack for anybody to talk about it and try and understand this video more. If you have questions, that's probably the best place to do it. With all that out of the way, go ahead and check out the description box below for a list of all the supplies you're going to need to make this project, as well as the free downloadable templates, and let's get started. The first thing we want to do is print the templates. I printed most of mine on tabloid size paper or 11 by 17 inches, but I also have standard letter size versions for those of you who don't have a large format printer. Next, we need to line up the template parts and tape the pages together. A light table isn't strictly necessary for this, but it makes things way easier. Keep doing this with all the different template parts until each piece for the Proton Pack is ready. If your pages overlap in a way that hides some of the lines, just use a Sharpie to trace the hidden part. This is another time when a light table comes in handy, and I've linked the one I'm using in the description box. Trim off all the excess white space. You don't need to cut all the way down to the actual shape yet, just leave about an inch or so all the way around the template. And we should end up with something like this. The part I'm working on right now is called the motherboard. Now we need a whole bunch of cardboard or chipboard. My motherboard is the largest piece, so I'm using the box that the light table came in because it's definitely large enough and flat with no folds. Use some temporary double-sided tape or go over the edges lightly with a glue stick because we will need to remove the paper after we cut the shape out. Next, we need some foam or thick cardboard to put under this while we cut the shape out. Put the foam under your cardboard and very carefully use an X-Acto knife to cut the shape out. When you're done, the shape should easily pop out of the cardboard. At this point, you can peel the paper template off. It might not look perfect, but that's okay for now. Only for the motherboard piece, we need 2 of them. Use what you just cut out to trace the shape onto another large piece of cardboard and cut that out as well. Now with 2 identical pieces, we want to glue them together. I used wood glue and it works like a charm. Put a bunch of little globs all over one of the pieces and then spread the glue out to cover the entire surface. We need to press this overnight to dry completely. I used a bunch of Wizarding Trunk boxes that still have some stuff in them, and a set of hardcover Harry Potter books. The next morning, I eagerly removed that heavy stuff to find that it is really sturdy, exactly as I had hoped. Keep cutting out all the different pieces, making sure to cut where the thick black lines are and score where the dotted lines are. I'm using a ruler and my Cricut scoring tool for that. Reinforcing those folds by scoring it is going to make things so much easier. Now we can make folds everywhere we scored. This is the same for every template excluding the motherboard. Going forward, just assume you cut the thick black lines and score the dotted gray lines. The piece I'm working on now is called the Synchronous generator. You'll want to fold all the flaps downward and inward, including the 2 large ones at the top. When everything's said and done, you might have to trim some of the inside parts so they don't overlap, and I'm using tape to hold my folds in place to make some of the work easier, but also so you can see exactly what should be folded and what shape it creates. With it all taped up, this is the shape our Synchronous generator should take. I'm not going to linger too long on these shots because you can pause the video if you need to. Before we do anything permanent, you should line this up on the motherboard where it goes just to make sure it fits properly. For the missing edges that are curved, we're going to use some chipboard, but you can also just use old cereal boxes. Measure the height of the Synchronous generator. It should be about 2.5 inches. Then measure and cut some long strips of chipboard at that height. Use a shipping tube or other cylindrical object to slightly bend the chipboard. We're going to use these strips on the inside as well as the missing curved parts. Using them on the inside like this is going to reinforce that inside wall. As for the missing curved part of the wall, we just want to line the curve of the chipboard up, and this will fill in that gap. Make it fold at the bottom of the chipboard where the curved part starts, and also make sure that the top part of the chipboard goes past the end of the curve by about an inch. Start with hot glue at the bottom of the fold we marked to start gluing the chipboard on. The hot glue gun is going to be your main tool throughout this build. Now glue the rest of the bottom part onto the inside wall. Line up that curve again and make a mark where it reaches the end of the curve. Fold where you marked and glue the inside flap onto the inside wall to complete the curve. You can see that some light comes through that edge. We're going to close that off with hot glue. Just really pile it on the inside to fill in that crack. Hot glue some more strips along the inside wall to reinforce it. At this point, you should have that entire inside wall pretty much reinforced. I'm adding one more little strip at the end so I can glue that longer wall to it. I also added a little patch to it just to make sure these pieces stay together. Now make another small piece of curved chipboard at the top to fill in the little empty part. Pretty much the same steps we took for the larger one, which should leave you with something like this. I used some thick foam I had lying around to double reinforce those curves. This helped them maintain their shape and gave them more places to actually glue the piece down onto the motherboard. Make sure it fits nicely, and let's continue. This next part is the power cell. If you do your cutting and folding right, it should be a rectangular box with a rectangular hole on the front of it. The bottom part actually needs 2 tubes coming out of it. We're using cardboard shipping tubes. I have a ton of these from getting rolled up prints and book covers from the Wizarding Trunk boxes. They should be side by side like this. First, hot glue them together, punch out or cut out some circles from chipboard big enough to cap off your tubes. Add a little hot glue and cap off the tubes. Line the tubes up on the bottom of the power cell and trace them with a pencil. Cut out the circles you traced. You might also have to do a little trimming on the inside flap, and the tubes should fit nicely inside. Now we're going to add some lights to that rectangle window. They need to be blue lights, so I found a transparent blue folder at Goodwill. I cut a piece out from this and glued it to the inside of that window. I also luckily found these LED lights at Goodwill too for like $3. We're going to have red lights too, and I also found a transparent red folder at Goodwill. I'm using a 1.5-inch hole punch to pop out 4 circles. Unfortunately, my lights had plastic clothespins over them that I had to remove, but I work with what I can get. We're going to use a black Magnum Sharpie or any permanent black marker and color the inside of this so the cardboard color can't be seen through that rectangular window. And now it's just a matter of hot gluing 7 LEDs onto the tube. They should be in a straight line, evenly spaced, running the length of the rectangular window. Once they're in, you'll want to test them and obviously make sure they line up properly. Then cut the cord and tape it and hot glue it around the other side so you can reach it through the back. Hot glue that power cell box closed and add a little hot glue around the creases and imperfections. It looks bad right now, but later it'll look good. We're gonna make it look like welding. And the power cell should look a bit like this. The next piece we put together is the Cyclotron. For the 4 circles on the front, I actually found some really big washers that were just about the right size. For the larger circle here, a Pringles can is a perfect fit. Go ahead and cut that big circle out as you cut out the main shape. The Pringles can should fit nicely there. For the smaller circles, cut out somewhere in between the outer and inner circles and go ahead and pop that out. When you place your washer on top, it should mask off any imperfections. Remember to always refer to the schematics as we go. According to the measurements, this should be 2 inches taller than the Synchronous generator. Let's mark a 2-inch strip on our chipboard. Measure the height of the Synchronous generator. Mine is 2 inches and 5/8 tall. Mark that much further down on your chipboard and cut the measured piece out. Bend it as we've done before, and we're going to use some foam to glue the walls onto our cyclotron. The foam should bend quite nicely around it. Line the inside edge of the cyclotron with hot glue and start gluing your foam on bit by bit until the entire edge is lined with foam. Then add some hot glue to the edge of the wall of your cyclotron and glue it all the way around the foam. You might have to use multiple pieces, but in the end, you should have something like this. Use this piece to trace a circle on the center of your Synchronous generator. Cut that circle out however you're comfortable doing it. I'm using an X-Acto knife, and the cyclotron should fit into that circle very easily. For the Pringles can, we need to measure it down to the height of the end filter in our schematics, which is 3 5/8 of an inch. Make your measurement on the bottom of the Pringles can. I'm using masking tape to line up the measurements to make sure the cut is straight. Use a small handsaw or even X-Acto knife to cut the bottom of the Pringles can off. It should now be just the right size to fit in that half circle cutout on the bottom edge of the cyclotron. There are some imperfections, and we are going to hide those imperfections and fill them in with hot glue. Some of you are probably thinking this is not going to look good, and you're right, it doesn't look very good until it's painted. As I glue, I'm making it look textured with the tip of my hot glue gun, giving it texture everywhere I've put the glue. And trust me, this is going to look good after it's painted because I'll make the hot glue look like welded metal. And once the cyclotron is completely glued into the Synchronous generator, it's time to add our end filter, aka Pringles can. Glue a piece of foam to the inside bottom of the Pringles can so it can stick to the edge of the Synchronous generator. Add hot glue everywhere the Pringles can is touching cardboard, and this will hold it in place very well. We'll need a way to get in here once the Proton Pack is done in order to get to the lights on the inside. So put one hand under this piece as you lift it away in order to mark where an opening should be. Draw a rectangle in this area and use a ruler and X-Acto knife to cut the left, right, and bottom edges of the rectangle out, leaving the top edge intact. You'll probably need to make a little slit along the top edge, but only about halfway through. This creates a little door in our motherboard so we can access the lights inside the cyclotron. We can now paint the motherboard completely black on both sides. You can use spray paint, but I used acrylic because I'm not in a ventilated area and it's way too cold outside to spray paint. I was a little worried about how this might look in the end, but it turned out great. While we're at it, let's go ahead and paint what we've built so far and set these pieces aside to dry. We also want to paint those 4 big washers black as well. The next piece we'll make is the ion arm. This comes in 2 pieces. We'll add a little glue on the top flap so we can start attaching these pieces together. This is how it should look at this point, so I'll show you how it all comes together. These 2 little flaps fold down and glue on the inside like this. And you just keep working your way down, gluing all those little flaps to the inside of the box. And in the end, the shape of the box should look like this. Don't worry about those bottom flaps yet. We'll use those to attach this to another part later. Next, we'll work on the bumper. We should have a middle piece that looks like this, and 2 side pieces like this. Mark the middle of the side pieces so the middle part can line up in the center. Where we mark these, we need to bend the side pieces so they'll follow the curve of the middle part. It's hard to explain, but you'll see what I mean. With all of our bends in place, it should look and fit together like this. If we look at reference images of the movie prop, one side of the bumper bends down a little bit and the other side doesn't. So we need to fold on the right side of the middle rectangle. About a 1/4 inch past that, make another fold in the opposite direction. Use a cylinder to bend the long edges of the centerpiece, and now we can kind of see it starting to take shape. With the center part face down, glue a piece of foam to the inside edge of it. Glue that to our side piece, flip it over and add some hot glue to the inside of the curved edges, and hold it in shape while the glue dries. Now we just want the long curved parts to follow the edge of the side piece. Keep using pieces of foam to glue these pieces together as we line this up. If those long parts aren't long enough, you might need to cut off some more chipboard to fill the empty spot. Do the right side exactly the same, but make sure those folds we made earlier allow it to bend down a little, then over, instead of being completely flat. And then pat yourself on the back because I think this is one of the most difficult parts to make and especially to explain. Paint the whole thing black, top and bottom, and set it aside. This little piece is the corner plate. Once you've cut it out and made your folds, it's pretty easy to see how it goes together. But then we have that empty curved space. Measure and trim a strip of chipboard. Make sure it's just long enough to fill that curve. Use our previously determined hot glue and foam method to get this glued on. Then glue another strip of foam to the other side, forcing it to follow the curve. This should fold in, and I'm sure you can see where it's going from here. Add hot glue to the inside curve and the 2 small flaps and fold it all together. Apologies for the bad camera shot here. I didn't notice until it was too late. But in the end, we have our curved corner plate. Paint it black. The gun mount box comes in 2 parts, a large box and a small box, and they're assembled in the same way. There are some other parts on the template, a tiny box, some imperfect rectangles, and some long strips. In this video, we're only using the large boxes and one of the long strips. The other pieces are to mount the plasma gun or thrower, which will have its own dedicated video. I also lost this piece of footage somehow. I definitely didn't forget to press the record button, so I've re-recorded it. I'll be making mine out of paper and 2-sided tape, but pretend it's cardboard and hot glue. This is probably the most straightforward piece. It just folds into a rectangular box. Work your way around it, folding at the score lines and tucking in the tabs. Eventually you'll be here. And then you just fold it closed. Do the same for the larger part and the smaller part. They're identical except for the size. Next, use the schematics as reference and glue the 2 parts of the gun mount box together. The smaller box should line up to the top back of the larger box. Trace the top shape of the gun mount box onto some chipboard. Cut it out and glue it on the top of the box. This hides the seam between the 2 boxes. Add our hot glue welding to the seams and imperfections, and when you're done, it should look like this. Now we move on to the EDA box. This also comes in 2 parts, one large, one small. I'm working with the large box here. By now you can probably guess how the templates work. All the flaps get folded, tucked, and glued to the inside of the box. This one does have one part you might need extra help with though. Just keep folding along the folds and tucking in the tabs, and eventually you'll get to this point right here. Then the small part tucks down. The larger top part closes, and you should end up with kind of the shape of a 1. Now it's time to glue. Let's fast forward to where things get just a little bit funky. Get yourself to this point where you only have 2 pieces to close up. The side piece that's long and tall, and the top part. On the side piece, there's a little flap that folds out instead of in, so you can glue the side into place. Reach in through the top and make sure those pieces are glued together. This completes the large part of the EDA box. Now onto the smaller piece. The only unfamiliar part of gluing this together is a diagonal piece. There's also a small kind of cutaway part, but you can see the shape it's taking, and it's very simple to fold and glue. You can also see my hands and cutting mat getting messier and messier throughout this project. It only gets worse. Anyway, once it's all glued, it looks like this. And when it's painted, it looks like this. Add some hot glue to the flaps on the back and glue it to the bottom right on the front of the larger piece. Make sure the slanted part is facing up. Hot glue weld the imperfections and paint it all black. Next is the crank generator gearbox. I'll just call it the gearbox. You'll notice the front has another sort of small cutaway part that we saw with the last piece. We just fold those long skinny flaps inward, so we end up with a sort of rectangular window. From here, just keep folding the flaps in and seeing where you'll be gluing to make it into a box. Try to hold it together as you do this, and now the part with that rectangular window can fold up. The bottom part can close, and this is the kind of shape we're going for. When you glue, start with that rectangular window, particularly these 2 little tabs. Rotate it and glue in the parallel little tabs. So we are here. Do this on the other side as well, and now it should look like this. Fold the side with the long flap over. Put some hot glue on the little tab at the end and glue it all the way over to the other side, filling in that rectangular window. Now it's just a matter of adding hot glue to the remaining tabs and gluing them into the box. If you save the top and the bottom until the end like I did, you'll have to put glue on all 3 tabs at once, then very carefully and clumsily tuck them all in at the same time. It's messy, but it works. And we end up with the correct shape, which looks like this. According to the schematics, one thing is missing: a 1-inch wide and 3-inch long tube. Measure and cut this from a 1-inch wide shipping tube. I lost some footage here, but here's a photo from later in the project for reference. Cap off the left side of the tube with a 1-inch circle punched out of chipboard and glue the tube into the middle of the rectangular cutout. Do not cap off the right side of the tube. Back to the cyclotron. Let's glue those 4 red circles we cut out earlier over the 4 holes on this piece. Put hot glue on all the tabs under the synchronous generator. Line it up and glue it onto the motherboard. Then give it the hot glue welding treatment all the way around. Then we can glue the 4 metal washers over the red circles. And we should have something that looks like this. I'm also going to add some hot glue welding around the top of the Pringles can and do a little touch-up painting. Next, we need a bunch of 1 5/8 inch by 2 3/4 inch rectangles of chipboard. Just cut out as many as you can from one sheet. Glue these all the way around the bottom part of the synchronous generator. There are 2 places where you can tell they should be thicker based on the motherboard, so just glue some more cardboard on those parts. In the end, we should be here. Now paint them all black. The power cell can also be attached now too, but I almost forgot that we need another door here in the motherboard so we can get to the electronics for the lights. Measure and trace a little rectangle here for our door and use an X-Acto knife to cut it out just like before. It's not as pretty as the first one, but it works. The capped off bottoms of the 2 tubes on the power cell need to be punctured in the middle. I'm using an awl for this, typically used for bookbinding, but it works here too. It's best to do this before you attach the power cell to the motherboard. Add some hot glue to the back tabs of the power cell and glue it down onto the motherboard. And we should be able to get to those 2 wires on the inside through the little door we made. Now we can attach the EDA box to the motherboard. It fits right beside the power cell, kind of like a Tetris piece. The crank gearbox will go right next to the EDA box, aligned at the top. The corner plate fits next to the gearbox in, you guessed it, the corner. The gun mount box goes right below the corner plate, flush with the side of the gearbox. Before we attach the ion arm, we can see from the schematics that we need to attach quite a few little pieces. I'm using found pieces that look like they could work. This is a mermaid wand from a kid's birthday party that will make up the long part at the bottom of the ion arm. We'll just cut the top off of that and use a deco color gold marker to color the whole thing gold. The gold rod should go somewhere near the very front of the ion arm. Use the schematics for reference, line it up where you want it, and then use your awl to make a hole in the bottom of the ion arm. Measure as straight as you possibly can and make a parallel hole in the top. There's also a bent piece at the top here that a tube fastens to. You'll find these in several various places on the Proton Pack. I'm using a 1/4 barb by 1/4 MPT piece. It's plastic and I got it at a local hardware store. Again, use the deco color gold marker and color the whole piece gold. Use a screwdriver to make the holes a little bit wider so the rod can fit through. Feed it all the way through both holes, trim a bit off the top if necessary, and then we can cap this off with that bent piece. My first thought was to cut the threaded part off the bottom, which proved almost impossible. I ended up having to use my Dremel, and even then it was a bit difficult and started melting the plastic. But in the end, the job was done, and it fit just how I wanted it to. Make another hole beside that and put another little piece of the golden rod through it. I used some hot glue to make sure this piece didn't look crooked. Back to the schematics, we have another little bent elbow piece here. I'll use the same part from before, but also an empty roll from dog poop bags. It fits perfectly over the barbed part. We just need to cut it in half. Paint this whole piece black, and while it dries, make a hole where we can attach it to the ion arm. To save myself trouble of trying to cut the threaded part off, I opted to make a larger hole that this piece could just screw into. This ended up being a way better and sturdier option anyway. Next, we have this Dale PH25 resistor. Instead of buying the part, which I would have had to order and I'm impatient, I chose to make something similar with a little 99-cent hand-me-down flashlight. Take the top off and batteries out, and all I need is the very bottom end of it. Pretty easy to cut off with a little handsaw, and it's just about the right size and similar shape. The actual part looks like this, and you can see it has a little metal nut at the bottom of it. The comparison of the top part isn't perfect, but I think it gets the point across. And if we use an actual metal nut underneath, it looks very similar. Paint the top part black and set it aside to dry. Make a little hole where we want to attach this piece. I couldn't find my small washers, but I did find this little rubber piece that'll also work, but you probably want to use a washer. Thread a screw through it, place the nut over the hole we made, and screw the screw through the center of the nut into the hole. We end up with this. Now back to the top part. Glue some foam into the inside of it, add hot glue all around it, and glue it into the nut we just screwed in. I'm pretty satisfied with that. The next part is on the other side of the ion arm. I couldn't find anything like this, so I used a heat sink out of an old decommissioned computer. I know it's not accurate at all, but it looks cool. Now we attach the ion arm to the motherboard. It actually attaches to the EDA box above the power cell. You know the drill. Hot glue the bottom tabs, glue the piece on, and it should look like this. Now we need a 2-inch wide shipping tube, or any sturdy tube you can cut. This tube runs up the height of the EDA box, and the bottom is cut at a slant. I didn't use any strict measurements. I just cut the tube at an angle that would match the slanted part of the EDA box. And I made sure it was the right height. We need to cap this off, so I used a 2-inch hole punch and some chipboard. Glue that circle to the top of the tube. Do not be careless like me and use your thumb to wipe away the dripping hot glue because it burns. But we have it cut and capped off. Now I'm using an empty tape roll for the smaller, shorter tube that protrudes from the top of the bigger one. Glue some foam to the inside of the empty tape roll and trim it down. Glue it centered to the top of the larger tube and cap it off with a 1.5-inch chipboard circle. Hot glue this in place on the EDA box. Do some hot glue welding around the bottom to make it look cool and also hide the imperfections, and paint the whole piece black. In hindsight, I probably should have painted this black before gluing it on, but at this point I'm running on fumes. For this front panel, I found a piece that's gonna work. It's a plastic ramp from a toy truck, but there is a template, so if you want to cut this out from cardboard, you can. Either way, 4 old marker caps or 4 empty dog poop bag rolls used earlier work well as a base for this. Hot glue them on like 4 legs of a table basically. Hot glue some foam into the bottom of those legs and paint the whole thing black, front and back. For me, this takes longer to dry because it's plastic. Once it is dry, add some hot glue to the bottoms of each of those legs, line it up, and glue it right over the bottom of the large tube, ending with something like this. Now we'll need another 1-inch wide tube, or at least a small part of one. We need to cut this at an angle. The tube I used was very hard to cut, even with my handsaw. In the end, I got it done, but it's not pretty. Line the angled part up on a piece of chipboard to trace it, apply some hot glue, and cap off the slanted top. Now we need to measure and pop a hole in the very center of the top. Widen the hole using any number of various methods. We will need a bit of ribbed tube. This came from an old manual air pump. Just a 2-inch piece should do. The tube goes through the hole we made, and we paint the entire piece black. The Danger high voltage sticker goes right on the top of this. And then the piece fits into the cutout at the bottom right of the EDA box. To attach the bumper, we'll need a small hole at the very center of it. Line it up on top the cyclotron. We also need a bunch of these washers. They're the same size as the 4 we already used, but the center hole is a lot smaller. We need a long screw to put through the center of our stack of washers. It's actually supposed to be a heavy-duty spring, but the washers will do the trick. Place the stack of washers on the center of the bumper. Then put the screw through them, going through that hole we made. Then screw it completely through the cyclotron. Flip it over and open up the door we made. Cut yourself out a thick piece of cardboard, poke a hole in the center of it, and screw it onto the screw we drilled through here. This will help keep things nice and tight. I'm actually planning now to replace this screw for one that doesn't have a sharp end, because if I lost my balance while I'm wearing this and fell on my back, this thing might stab me right in the back. Close things up, flip the pack over, and use a screwdriver to tighten the screw as much as you need to. We also need to puncture some holes in the sides as well to hold the sides of the bumper in place. Twist the screw all the way through the side of the bumper and the Synchronous generator. Do this on both sides and you should end up with a fairly sturdy bumper. Now we're going to work with some EVA foam. If you're a cosplayer, you're probably familiar with this. All those little squares and strips, if you don't have EVA foam, cut them out from cardboard. But if you can get this foam, cut out a bunch of strips of this width. Don't worry about the length. The longer the better. Use your schematics to find where all these little strips are. But there are strips all around the gearbox, the gun mount, and some on the power cell. Make sure you take some even measurements just to make sure they're all spaced out the correct amount. Use hot glue to start attaching the strips. So just glue the tips on where we've measured. No need to wrap them around yet. Keep going until you have all the strips on. Then we're going to be bending them around and gluing those parts down too. Once we're all done, you should be here. And then we just trim off all the excess around the back. When that's done, it should look like this. Now keep using this similar method for all the strips. Once we have all the foam strips where they need to be according to the schematics, we need to paint them all black too. Next up is the Hydrogen Gas Actuator, or HGA. We need a 2-inch wide by 2.5-inch long shipping tube. Cap this off in the same way we've done before and add some hot glue welding around the rim. There are 2 of those bent elbow pieces on the side of it, as well as 5 bolts on the cap of it. Use the schematics to make your measurements and add a couple of holes where we'll be adding the elbow pieces. Just like before, one of the elbow pieces should be colored completely gold. The other one needs the cardboard end piece and can be painted black. Use a drill to enlarge the holes, measure and puncture holes on the cap for our screws, and then let's paint the whole thing black. When it's dry, screw the elbow pieces into the large holes on the side of it, and make sure the 4 screws on the cap will fit. Now we can get into the sticker. The circular one that says high press, short for pressure. Cut it out, and yes, if you're feeling saucy, I've also included a Cricut cut guide. Remove the screws from the HGA, apply the sticker to it, replace the screws, and you should end up with something like this. I'm adding some black around the sticker to hide the edges where some white is visible. In the end, I think this makes it look a lot more natural. Now we'll add a little dab of hot glue to each of the screws and press them in to make them a bit more permanent. Here's a close-up. I just think it looks really cool. To attach the HGA, cut out a circle of foam, glue it into the bottom of the HGA tube, and then we're going to glue it to the side of the gearbox, close to the front so the elbow pieces are accessible. Here's a better look at the placement. And as always, add some hot glue welding around where you attached it. Well, the crank gearbox needs a crank, and I'm using the top part of a soap bottle pump. Center it and trace the bottom part, cut out a hole where you traced, grab yourself an empty tape roll, glue the pump through it, and paint it completely black. Add a little hot glue around that hole you cut, and insert the crank. You should have something like this. There are a couple random parts, I don't even know what to call them, but cut a 5 3/4 inch length of 1.5 inch tubing. We're going to cap this off with chipboard again, but you want one of these elbow parts to fit in the middle of that cap. Cap off the tube the same way we've been doing it, then paint it black. When it dries, we'll place it right in the nook of the synchronous generator, below the danger high voltage part. Now color that elbow piece gold and stick it on top. And here's a better look at the placement. Make another tube the same size but with no hole in the top cap. This will go a little to the left of the part we just put in. Looking at this template, we will need to make these two circles go on top of the synchronous generator. The top circle is 2 inches wide and the bottom circle is 3 inches wide. So a Pringles can lid will work as the template. From here on, it's very important to look at reference images. The top circle has a thick ribbed tube coming out of it. I was able to find this split loom tubing at a secondhand shop. It fits perfectly inside this shipping tube, which is the perfect size for that inner circle. Use your 2 inch wide hole punch to pop out a chipboard circle. We'll use it to cap off the wider tube. Glue the smaller tube to the center of the capped off wide tube. Paint it black and attach it to the top of the synchronous generator. Now we can put the tube inside that piece. And the other side of the tube goes into the tube on the crank gearbox. You should end up with something like this. For the larger circle below that, we'll use some more foam. From that, we'll cut out this piece and a piece the size of the Pringles can lid. Trace those pieces as templates, cut them out, and sand the edges in a ventilated area. Glue the large piece into place first, then the smaller piece centered on top of that. We're going to put one of these screws on either side of the small piece, so use it to make some indents in the foam where you'll be screwing them in. Now puncture a hole in each of the indents and screw the bolts in. Now measure a 1 1/4 inch tube against the other part of that template and cut it down to size. We want to cap this off, but first cut a hole in the middle of your chipboard circle. Widen the hole enough for one of these empty rolls of dog poop bags, and it should all come together like this. Gluing some foam around the side of the inside of the little tube is going to help it fit nicely together. Now stuff the cap of that little tube with foam and cap it off with a tiny little chipboard hole punch. I painted it white before realizing it's supposed to be silver, so paint it black, then dab silver on the top with a little sponge or piece of foam. Then glue it to the center of the piece we put the bolts through. Here's how it's supposed to look. But pretend the white's black. I fix it later. Ignore the painting. We'll go over that next. There are 2 circular parts right on the front of the EDA box. For these, I popped out 8 1-inch circles of chipboard. I hot glued 2 stacks of 4 side by side and then painted them black. A very small detail, but it definitely makes it look better. The Cyclotron needs one of these elbow pieces, capped off with a little silver tube from the dog poop bag rolls. This piece goes right here on the side of the Cyclotron. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. Drill a hole in the side of your Cyclotron and attach the elbow piece. Now is as good a time as any to start making it look like old welded metal. With a silver paint marker, add some random dots around the edges. Then use a sponge or scrap piece of foam to dab it and blend it. If you overdo it, no problem, just dab the silver with some more black to dial it back. It should look something like this, although I will spend some more time on it to improve it. Another technique that really worked well is putting the silver paint directly on the sponge or foam and dabbing that around on the hot glue welding. Even without spending time on the details, it does look like welded metal. This is the technique I used on the entire pack. The little red high pressure sticker goes on the side of the hydrogen gas actuator. The yellow filler plug and air vent sticker goes on the upper side of the synchronous generator. The white danger high voltage sticker goes on the upper front of the end filter, and the little black sticker with the red diagram goes right below it. The blue motor Synchronous sticker goes on the right side of the bumper. The white caution hot sticker goes on the thick panel on the left side of the Synchronous generator. The small red danger high voltage sticker goes on the little piece of the EDA box. The red warning gearbox label goes on the bottom half of the crank gearbox. The red fire hazard warning sticker goes on the top of the EDA box. The clippered sticker goes on the side of this random part on the Synchronous generator. I don't know what it's called. And the big red danger high voltage sticker goes right in the upper middle on the back of the motherboard. So I found a bunch of this ice maker tubing at a secondhand shop, and this is what I'm going to be working with. There are 2 tubes that go through the side of this little danger piece. Puncture a hole near the top corner and the bottom corner of that label. Make the holes a little bit bigger with whatever method you want to use, and we need some red tubing. One end goes in the bottom of the danger piece, and the other end goes on the elbow piece on the side of the cyclotron. Use a little hot glue to make it a bit more permanent. Now we'll need another length of red tubing. This one goes from the left elbow piece of the HGA to the top hole on the danger piece. Make sure it weaves in between that large black tube. Next, we need a length of smaller black tubing. This one goes from the elbow piece under the danger part up to the elbow piece on the HGA. Use some black electrical tape to secure this into place, leaving you with this. We need a length of blue tubing to go into the top of the danger piece on the EDA box. We'll feed the other end into some black ribbed tubing and glue that behind the heatsink on the ion arm, leaving you somewhere like this. I tried really hard to get the tube to bend properly when it comes out of the top, but it was just too thick, so in the end, I used something different. We need some even thinner black tubing now, which I don't have, so I made it by cutting the smaller tubing in half, adding some hot glue to one side of it, and then wrapping it around a pencil, gluing one side to the other to make it thinner. One of our red tubes will feed into the hole on the front tube of the power cell, followed by a thin black tube we made. The other end of this red tube feeds into the thick panel on the side of the Synchronous generator, the one with the sticker on it, also covered with the thin black tube where it connects. We'll want to pop a hole right there where the red tube can feed into, and do the same thing on the other side with blue tubing, leaving you with something like this. This next one is actually supposed to be yellow tubing, but I didn't have yellow. I did have green, and green is kind of like yellow's cousin. One end of it goes into the elbow part on the bottom of the ion arm. The other end wraps up and into another piece of black ribbed tubing that we can glue on the side of the front of the ion arm. To make the tubing look a little aged and dirty, I just dabbed on some black paint with a piece of foam. Next, we have this ribbon cable here. I ordered a roll of rainbow ribbon cable on Amazon, but maybe you'll be lucky enough to find an old computer you can grab one out of. We'll make this look dirty and aged, just using a sponge and some black paint. Then wipe it with a rag to spread out that dirty look. And I'm gonna use some walnut stain distress ink to dull those whites. Let's do that on both sides of the ribbon cable. Cut 2 2.5 by 2 inch pieces of cardboard. Line it up on the cyclotron and trace the bottom of the cardboard. I know this isn't the best angle, but what you traced should follow along the curve of the cyclotron. Cut both pieces along that curve. Color these pieces with your silver paint marker and glue the ribbon cable in between them. This piece should fit nicely on the side of the cyclotron. Hot glue it on, then add more hot glue to hide the imperfections. Puncture holes on either side of the ribbon cable, then twist screws into those holes. Remember the flashlight from earlier? This is the black piece from around the top of it. But you could also just use some more cardboard tubing. Glue this onto the other end of your ribbon cable. Then glue some foam into it, then paint the foam black. Twist your ribbon cable once or twice, feed that end of it between the EDA box and the blue tubing. Then glue the end of it to the motherboard beside the EDA box. Make sure the painted part of the foam is facing upright. Now take a metal hose clamp and use it to fasten the ribbon cable to the grid part thingy on the EDA box. When you're done, the cable should run along from the front of the Proton Pack, just like this. Now for the lights, I had originally gotten this whole programmable electronics kit to try and simulate the actual light sequences from the movie, but this was a little bit over my head. But we are finally ready to add the lights. I've cut them all off except for the 4 closest to the battery pack. Make sure to strip the wires on the other end so we can attach these to the power cell lights. Now we need 4 empty tape rolls. Glue each of them around one of the red pieces on the inside of the cyclotron. glue one light onto each of those empty tape rolls. Make sure the lights themselves are around the center of the tape roll, and glue the battery pack to the inside of the door we made. Now we need some wire, preferably a black cord like this. I just cut this off of an old broken lamp. If your wires are stuck together like this, make sure to mark one side of each end so you know which is which. Strip the wires and use hot glue to splice them onto the bare wires of the lights. And now we move on to the blue lights in the power cell. Open the little door we made to access the stripped wires in the back. If you skipped that part, yes, we've already put the lights in here. Turn the battery pack on and touch each one of our exterior wires to the interior power cell wires. If the lights don't turn on, swap the wires to the opposite sides and touch them to the power cell wires again. The lights should turn on. Splice them together, again with some hot glue, and wrap them with black electrical tape for good measure. Stuff any extra length of wire into the back of the Proton Pack, switch on the batteries, close it up, and take a look at the awesome lights we just set up in a few minutes. And now we're gonna do a little more work on the end filter. Yes, I should have done this before I attached it. I forgot. We need a 9-inch wide piece of paper with 1/2-inch holes punched about every inch. This should wrap around the end filter, giving us a good stencil to work with, because we need to drill these holes all the way around it. Tape your template in place with some masking tape, and I used a paint marker to mark these circles. When they're all marked, you can take the stencil off. At first, I used a drill to make my holes, and that was a bad idea because they ended up looking really messy. In my defense, I've never drilled into a Pringles can before. Anyway, I cleaned up the holes as well as I could with an X-Acto knife and shaped them as circular as possible with the end of a Sharpie. I then painted over the silver marker with black paint, and after all this, they still didn't look that great. I should never have used that drill. So I decided to go off script a bit and use some small washers to mask those imperfect holes. I hot glued them all on, painted them black, and it didn't turn out too bad. Now wrap some masking tape evenly around the top of the end filter so that the side of the tape comes down about 1/4 inch from the top of the can. Next, we'll need a red rubber band. I couldn't find a red one, so mine's orange. The rubber band wraps around the end filter where the masking tape stops. The tape is a guide to help us wrap the rubber band around straight and even. Since my rubber band is orange, I have this red paint marker which I'll use to color the rubber band red. And you can barely tell it's not a red rubber band. I also added a little bit of black detailing just to make it look a little grungy, and ended up with this, which I'm pretty satisfied with. And when all is said and done, you have a full-sized Ghostbusters Proton Pack, complete with the lights and everything. I know that they are not animated like they're supposed to be. It's just cool to have it light up in some way. I am going to be redoing the lights on this at some point, so that actually will be another video on this series where I do the lighting properly, because I did get that electrical kit and I'm going to use it. But here is a good look at the Proton Pack. It's hard to get in the frame all together unless I'm standing and holding it kind of crooked or sideways. I think this thing turned out really, really cool looking. It is made of cardboard, keep that in mind. Don't go out in the rain and get it wet or anything. Here are some better shots and photos of it. Let me know what you guys think of this. I think it turned out way better than I expected, being made out of cardboard and hot glue. But I've got to say, I am extremely happy with how this came out. Anyways, that is it, guys. I hope you liked the project. Let me know what you think, and I hope you're looking forward to some more in this series. Also, let me know, what was your favorite Ghostbusters movie? Mine was Ghostbusters 1 and 2, and then obviously Afterlife. Did you guys like Ghostbusters Afterlife? I did, and I really hope that they come out with a really good sequel to that one. Anyway, that's it. Happy December, happy holidays. I will be posting some more Christmas-themed videos, Harry Potter-themed videos coming up very soon within the next week. If you made it all the way to the end of the video with me, you're a wizard, Harry, even though this is Ghostbusters. Give it a thumbs up down below if you did enjoy it. Subscribe if you're not subscribed for more Harry Potter DIYs, as well as other fandoms that I love, like Ghostbusters and Back to the Future, and so many more. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.